Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. You're watching our special coverage in the run up to budget 2025-26, a budget that comes at a time when growth has slowed down, consumption is weak, and there are fears of the impact of trade wars being unleashed from the United States and its likely impact on the Indian economy. And joining me to decode the state of the economy and also raise some points with regard to what this budget should do to revive growth as well as investment is a panel of top industry captains. I'm joined by Sanjeev Puri, the president of the Confederation of Indian Industry, and he's also the CMD of ITC Limited. I have with me Rajiv Memani, President Designate at CII. He's the Chairman and CEO of EY India. We also have with us R. Mukundan, the Vice President of CII, and he's the MD and CEO of Tata Chemicals. Welcome to the show. Let me go across to Sanjeev first. Sanjeev, let's hear from you as to what really is the shape of the economy right now before we come to the prescriptions that CII has for this budget.
So you're all aware that the estimates for the year stand at 6.4%. The first half is 6, so that means the second half should be 6.8. CII estimates anywhere between 6.4 and 6.7. The first half has been a little slower because of some transient factors, weather, and I think the government spends also were weaker in the initial part, but they have since picked up. And also, the monsoons are better. Agriculture is, of course, in a better shape, and with good monsoons, it should do well. And as the spends pick up, I think the economy should, pick up. CII is, as I said, between 6.4 to 6.7. Having said that, I think this is not the potential. This is not what we should be aiming for. We have to look at 8% and beyond. And really, at this point of time, there are two headwinds that I think the economy faces. More due to external factors, weak global demand, and also a situation where excess capacity in some parts of the world is finding its way at unviable prices into the world and also into India. That is subduing demand for Indian manufacturers and also pushing investments back. And the second is softness in consumption. And softness in consumption, of course, we are looking at it from an Indian context, but with respect to the rest of the world, I would say we are still better off. And so I think we need to address these two pieces. The first, I think government and policymakers are very much focused on looking at the safeguard measures that need to be put in place. But I think what we need today in today's world is a more agile way or a faster way of responding to these situations. And one of the reasons, one of the factors that's been impacting consumption is really the sticky food inflation. So we need to address that systemically, which calls for building resilience in agriculture. So CII is suggesting a national commission on agriculture resilience and adaptation. These are two areas to address the headwinds. And of course, this whole piece on consumption has also to be dealt with more targeted measures, like certain relief on income tax. We're also looking at suggesting moderation in the petrol, the excise on petroleum products. We're also saying that the payouts under the MGNREGS wages need to be aligned to what the expert committee has recommended. So these are short-term measures that will provide impetus to consumption and therefore further provide impetus to investments in the economy.
Rajiv, between all the factors and some of the headwinds that are buffeting the economy, when we take a look at recent quarterly results, it seems to suggest that demand is really one of the key things that producers are, dealing with. What's your own assessment of the equation and the mix as far as our economy is concerned?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think India has had pretty strong, stable growth over the last, post-COVID, and I think we'll continue to have that. The one of the challenges where the growth today, and especially in the last few quarters, is slower than what everyone was projecting. I think largely, if you break this up and look at three components, I think agriculture is over 3.5%, 3.8% growth. So I think that's broadly where we have been. I think the growth on the manufacturing side and the industrial production side is where the impact is. And services broadly is in the range, slightly lower than where it should be. In some ways linked because of on the banking and financial services side, the credit growth has been there, but it's slower than last year. So if you go back then and look at it, the real reason for is and if you look at the performance of the companies also, the one of the main reasons earlier it started with rural demand, that the rural demand was slower, especially, and then I think now one is witnessing that in urban demand also. As Sanjeev mentioned, I think it's kind of got kicked off partly because of during the elections, there was a slowdown in the capex spend as it happens of the government, and that was one of the big pusher of growth. And secondly, we had a pretty harsh summer and a very long monsoon. So that also impacted the dynamics of some of the industries. So I would say consumption is probably, you're absolutely right, Siddharth. I think that's one of the biggest reasons. And impacted by inflation and in some ways sentiments and other things. And I would say today urban consumption is probably more impacted than rural consumption. I would also say the drivers of growth, employment growth, were partly in services, so technology industry, the entire startup ecosystem. That was, growing very rapidly, and the sentiment was very positive. Because of the global scenario, I think the technology industry in the last 12 months, and it's now changing, were not hiring as much. And I think that had an impact on the overall sentiment. And we also know that entire startup ecosystem where billions of dollars were poured in and people were getting employed, I think that also stopped. And you had food inflation to deal with. So the income levels in the hands of consumers were lower. Also say is because of global volatility in some commodities. So if you that has also impacted. So if you look at chemical industry as an example, or you were to look at some of the commodities as an example, I think what Sanjeev was saying that because of surplus capacity in some countries, and if you look at the trade surplus of those, that country, it's just amazing. $1 trillion of trade surplus is just incredible. Absolutely. It looks like the world's manufacturing is coming into one geography.
And given what is happening in its own domestic economy, Rajiv, perhaps that fear of dumping goods at unrealistic prices exists all across the country. Mukundan, I'm coming to you since Rajiv Memani spoke about the chemical sector, but the question really is, does it feel to you as an industry captain that the Indian economy is facing a structural slowdown? Because over the recent past, especially after the most recent GDP numbers, there is a view in economists that we are now perhaps looking at a structural slowdown. What do you feel as an industry captain?
Fundamentally, I think the fact is that we are at our current level of per capita GDP and the current state of opportunity we should be structurally the right economy for future growth. So clearly, we see this as an opportunity economy. We see this as one of the brightest spots. If you look at the kind of investments industry has been putting in relation to, and also many large groups who are members of CII have been placing bets on India. I think it's been very clear, overwhelming bet in terms of the future growth of this country. I think what really has happened, as clearly Rajiv also highlighted, in some sectors there are headwinds which are coming in fundamentally from external sector. And I think we need to recognize that. Having said that, is it a permanent external threat? It is not. We are very well positioned to be very competitive. To drive the competitive position further, what CII is advocating is, in fact, drive the ease of doing business even more rather than double down on that, double down on growth, double down on investment. So when we did a survey amongst the CEOs in our CII National Committee meeting, overwhelming majority actually came out that in H2 they were investing more than in H1. So it's a timing issue. Second, in next
Okay.
year, in fact, that same momentum is continuing. So clearly, and some sectors have actually grown very well. If you look at renewable energy, electronics have grown well. We take the case of electronics itself, it's plugged into international supply chain. That is a huge opportunity for India. So wherever we can sort of plug into the international supply chain, the current geopolitics, I think there are positive tailwinds for us and we should capitalize on it. What we should be focusing on is to make ease of doing business better. Also,
Okay.
continuing with the labor code adoption, because that has been almost most states are in favor of it. That will also ease and also simplifying some of the, and unifying the environment and EPR regulations. A combination of
Okay.
these, I think, would drive the investment further and growth further.
Sanjeev, before I come to you, I want to go to Rajiv and pick up that one point because, for the benefit of our viewers, uh, the 2 points that have been made, and the third point by Bukundan about certain actions on ease of doing business, let's take them up one by one. Rajiv, coming to you first. The union budget can't do anything with goods and services taxation, but import duties are completely in its hand. Since you spoke about the fears of industrial level dumping affecting local producers, do you feel that a very close look needs to be taken at the evolving situation, and our import tariff toolkit should be very, very agile, not just in the forthcoming budget, but even beyond that?
No, Siddharth, completely agree. So in the last budget, the finance minister did announce that they are doing a very comprehensive review of customs duty and how what should be the longer term play. And from CII's standpoint, I think we have recommended that you break it up into three components. One is for import duties, for raw materials, for intermediates and finished goods, and obviously lower for raw materials and probably the highest for finished goods. So, but it's not simplistic. Sometimes things are finished goods somewhere or raw material somewhere else. So I think it requires a lot of agility in dealing with it. And plus, I think in some cases we have to have a longer term view, because if someone is committing to setting up a manufacturing plant, I think they just want a more longer term view. Otherwise, it's very difficult to set up manufacturing in India or some form of incentives. In some markets, for example, in Middle East and other places, there is a lot of incentive for domestic manufacturing, domestic value add. So I think we should.
Rajiv, was it a mistake for that earlier 2019 break to be allowed to end? And should the government now bring that back? Because the point that you make, manufacturing capacity addition cannot just happen with the click of a finger.
So when you say break, are you referring to the 15% tax rate, or you're talking of something
Absolutely. Absolutely, 15%.
No, I personally don't think it was a mistake. I think it has to be more targeted. My view is that, and through last time what they did with ELIs, which CI had also recommended, the product and PLI schemes and everything. I think the corporate tax rates are moderate. Where we need is, in some cases, multiple in ministries coming together and having a longer term view. So if you look at, for example, the EV, electricity vehicle industry, there are multiple industries that are involved. So how do we have a consistent view, whether it's on batteries, whether it's on battery swapping, whether it's on EV, whether it's tariff, whether it's hybrid? If we can have a longer term consistent view, I think people can have a view on how they want to look at investments. And many sectors have that. The second is, I think we will have to be more agile in terms of taking action on the duty front, to protect the interest, especially where dumping is happening. And in
Right.
labor-intensive manufacturing, I think definitely incentives need to be given both at a state level and central level. I think more than income tax, lower income tax rates, I think it's something that can be done which propels investment at upfront. I think that probably will be better utilization of the money. Otherwise, lower tax rates are always welcome, but we know that the government has a fixed amount, finite kitty that they can distribute. So I think probably that money will be more effective uh, in those areas.
You are absolutely right. In fact, that finite kitty is now more and more both at the center and state level going into various welfare giveaways. India, there's a large section of India that needs support. No arguing against that, but resources are limited. Sanjeev, I want to come back to the point that you had originally brought up in the discussion, but the question I have for you is uh, a lower corporate tax rate to incentivize manufacturing. The original premise was only greenfield. We have just recently reported that there is some thinking that it could also be extended to brownfield. Would that lower concessional rate coming back and being more liberal make a difference as far as new capacity creation on the ground is concerned across India?
Uh, Certainly, when the income tax rates are lower, the case for investment gets strengthened and is always welcome. But investments will happen to meet certain demand, to meet a requirement. So I think what is important is to first of all recognize that there are certain sectors where there is momentum in investment, and we can take the lessons from those sectors. Electronics is one example. Even if you look at defense, for example, now India is becoming a more and more exporter of this. So many sectors like that are evolving. What I think we need to do is that in the context of the next phase of development of the economy and to capitalize on India's demographic dividend, we need to provide targeted measures to look at sectors that have a high labor intensity. And these are, things like furniture, footwear, apparel, even tourism. Tourism is doing well, but I think the potential is enormous. And what kind of targeted investments can be made? For example, if you look at tourism, I think granting infrastructure status, which is so very important to provide access of long-term funding for the industry, will provide further impetus. If you were to look at sectors like footwear and apparel, I think a targeted PLI stroke ELI kind of scheme to provide impetus. I think the next generation reforms like the labor, because this industry requires flexibility given the nature of the industry, it requires flexibility. I think government is already focused on FTAs, and UK, EU particularly is important. So how soon can these be done expedited? All these will provide impetus. Then it's also about, taking the measures that will help us to integrate with global value chains better, because 70% of the global trade is in global value chains. Now, I think Rajiv mentioned about the three-tier duty structure. But what we are saying as a larger point is sectorally, we have to identify the sectors of opportunity and take an integrated view as far as trade, investments, infrastructure, skilling, etc. is concerned, like has been done to some other sectors in the past. So we need to
Right.
broaden and take it to another sector. And the third point, I will also bring out actually two more points I must bring to the table here. One is that MSME is a large employment, it has a large employment base, and strengthening the MSME is very important. So from an ease of doing business, I think there are a lot of digital tools that have been put in place. Can that be converted into a one-stop or one platform integrated solution for ease of doing business? There are some, interesting initiatives like ONDC that have happened in the recent past to provide market linkages. Can they focus on MSME and provide market access? So these are some very important sectors to revive manufacturing. And before I end, I must also mention that agriculture still remains a sector which has the largest number of our workforce. And whilst we are developing manufacturing and hopefully more and more people will get into the non-farm sectors, but it will remain a significant pool. And therefore, better productivity and addressing the issues of vulnerability to climate change. I think this is important to improve farmer income, which can again lead into this whole consumption cycle. And vulnerability of agriculture to climate change also is one of the reasons why food inflation is sticky, eating into the consumption basket of urban consumers and therefore having a cascading effect, across the economy. So therefore, CI is also suggesting creating a national commission on adaptation and agriculture resilience. I think this is an activity that needs to be taken up on war footing, and connected to that, a lot of economic activity is dependent on water. And we know water is becoming a challenging resource in many parts and could potentially even impact agriculture in the future. So we are also recommending a national mission on water security to be established. I think these are some of the factors that we need to look at, and we have also spoken about a few factors like consumption, boosting consumption. So these are a combination of really certain factors which can provide quick impetus to the economy, whether it's through safeguard schemes and consumption, and then medium
Okay.
term drivers of growth need to be strengthened, which are some I have spoken about and some my colleagues have spoken about. So this is the way CII is looking at the whole situation.
As we get into the very last few minutes of the conversation, Mukundan, I'm coming to you and asking you about how the internship scheme has fared, and do you think it made a difference? And if there is a further doubling down on that from the government, would that be a welcome thing, at least from a skilling point of view, and perhaps in the medium term, reducing some of the employment job demand pressures that we face?
So, firstly, I must say it was an excellent start. And I think we have some learnings from it. We must incorporate those learnings. What CII effectively is also highlighting is there are multiple schemes on employment and employability across various ministries. We want them to be subsumed under one scheme so that it is not in multiple areas. So that's one recommendation we certainly are highlighting. Second, we are also highlighting rather than extend the same scheme to MSMEs too, because they are large job creators.
Okay.
Thirdly, we are also saying extend the scheme with a specific focus on women employment. These are some of the specific recommendations we made to the government. So I think we must move forward. It was the right scheme. It is the right scheme, and move forward with even more focus.
Okay. Rajiv, I want to sort of end this conversation by asking you to be a pollster. What are the chances that the government will respond to the demands from the middle class, from individual income taxpayers, the salaried, that they want a tax break? They want a tax break both on the direct tax front, and obviously there are demands for GST as well, but that the GST Council will take a call on. What are the chances that the government is and the finance ministry is likely to say, listen, we are going to sweeten the new tax regime more, which is a nearly zero exemption scheme, and you move out of the old income tax regime? Is that the more likely scenario in your view?
Yeah, Siddharth, I think that's a more likely scenario. Uh, I would say in the lower to middle income category, where people have been impacted by inflation, whether it's food inflation or other areas of inflation. I think it's a justified need, and I hopefully a lot of this money will come back, either in terms of taxes, because this all leads to more consumption, or it will come back because it creates greater employment. So I think there's a high probability that government will give. If they do give, as they've given historically, I think in the last 4 5 years, a lot of that is towards the new tax regime. I think the government has been very clear that they want to move away from the old tax regime, which had a lot of concessions, into a much more simpler newer tax regime. And I think it'll probably be, I think it may be more directed towards those income levels than right across.
Okay. One final follow-up, and that again with you, Rajiv, and this is to do with our capital markets. We've seen in the recent past a flight of capital from our stock markets, and perhaps there are some undertones in the markets where they desire a better tax treatment. Is there any chance that the government could respond to some of those concerns?
I think I don't think the flight of capital is or the outbound movement on FI is because of tax reasons. I think a lot of the tax reasons have been simplified. Some issues do crop up, and I think there are areas in whether in OFS or in some amount of FII, private equity, which will require clarity. But none of them, or some of them may require, or AIF, some of which may require some changes. And obviously, gift always comes up. But none of them are those which are causing flight of capital. I think a lot of that is driven by global interest rates, general view of valuations in India. I think those are driving that FI money coming going out, or they being net outflows. I think yeah, and the good news is that
Well, perhaps my question, Rajiv, perhaps my question should have been better worded to say that can the government use tax instruments to incentivize or further incentivize the return of capital in large quantities?
yeah, I mean, everyone would love it, but as I said, there is just finite amount of capital that's available. And I think government probably, Siddharth, is looking more at foreign direct investment than FI. I think money in capital markets is significant. You have almost $40 billion of SIP money that's coming through. And hopefully over a period of time, the FI money will also come through. I think where probably the government should be more focused on is to see how we can get foreign direct investment in more and more, because that's been stagnant. Although last few months, last 6 months has gone up slightly, but that's been stagnant for a while. So if there are things that we can do, particularly around ease of doing business and other things, and also be more targeted in some sectors, I think that's where the focus should be. I don't think it has to do with what the capital gains tax rate is.
Okay. Nirmala Sitharaman's eighth budget, viewers, and at this rate, it's very clear that she is going to set a new record. But the macroeconomic backdrop is pretty challenging. The external environment is pretty challenging, and in all of this, a budget with all the constraints and the finite kitty, as Rajiv put it, is going to be watched very, very closely for what it does for restoring a much higher rate of economic growth in India. Sanjeev Puri, Rajiv Memani, and R. Mukundan, thank you very much for your time with us today in helping us understand the contours of the budget that is just coming up in a few days. With that, it's a wrap on this conversation, viewers. We'll continue tracking Budget 2025-26. Do stay tuned in. Time for a short break. We'll be back with more. Bye bye.